Okay, Chris Speaks back here with Brandon Moseley for our weekly BCS State of Alabama podcast. So we got Congressman Mo Brooks with us today. Um, Congressman, first question I have for you. You know all well how powerful or influential a Trump endorsement can be in certain elections. What is your take on this Trump endorsement of Barry Moore against his opponents, and how do you think it will affect that race?
Well, the Trump endorsement is significant in a Republican primary. Some of the people he has endorsed over the years have lost, so it's not impregnable. It will definitely help Barry Moore, in my judgment. But Steve Marshall and the other three candidates, or four candidates, as the case may be, they're going to have something to say about that. And quite frankly, in my impression, is that a Trump endorsement right now is not as potent as it once was. It's still strong, but not as strong for a variety of reasons, probably related to foreign policy or the tariffs or the state of the economy, inflation, 750,000 more unemployed Americans today than a year ago. All of those things have diminished the importance of the Trump endorsement. So it used to be all powerful. Now it's still significant. It's a good thing to have, but it's not what it once was.
Well, Congressman Moore, most of the polling I saw that, Marshall was running somewhere between 37% to as high as 40%, maybe sometimes as low as 34%. And Barry and Jared Hudson were kind of down there in the teens. Does this endorsement help more and more in picking up undecideds, or does it possibly erode some of the front runner support that Marshall to this point has enjoyed?
Well, if it's like most Trump endorsements, it has an across the board effect with all of the above that you just mentioned. Now, the key question is going to be by how much? And we'll probably know the answer to that over the next month or two. It'll take a while for the campaigns to get out their messages. We've seen the first salvo by the Barry Moore campaign on Saturday and Sunday, and now it's Monday. And you've also seen Steve Marshall's reply. I haven't seen replies from the other senatorial candidates, but I'm confident they'll also have something to say. And then we'll have to see how the voters weigh it once they've heard all the arguments pro and con. But I agree with you. Steve Marshall has been number one in the polls up until Saturday. Now, will the Trump endorsement do enough to push Barry Moore up to the top? I don't know. I think it does put him in a much better position to make the runoff. And if you get one-on-one with somebody, then I think what you have to look at is not only the endorsement of Trump, which is still important in a runoff, but also the financial abilities you have to message that endorsement plus everything else.
Congressman, let me ask you, if you're the Marshall campaign and that's your candidate, and you've got the longest serving attorney general in state history and the man with the name recognition, are you concerned that your candidate now has 63% of the people saying they're not voting for him right now?
No, because he's in first. In politics, it's a comparison. And while if you were an incumbent and your reelect was around 37%, well, that's not a good thing. But if you are running in an open seat, you have to look at where all the others are. And so while he has 60 something percent, whatever the number may be, that are not yet sold on him, the other candidates have even larger numbers who are not sold on them. So let's see how it all shakes out. We've got some good people running. And I think a lot of voters are going to have a hard time deciding amongst the good quality people that are in that race.
Congressman Brooks, changing the subject. Um, I don't want to be too melodramatic here, but we've actually got German and British and Italian and Danish troops being rushed to Greenland, not because the Chinese or the Russians may invade, but because the United States might. Are we maybe looking at, the implosion of NATO as a functional treaty organization after 70 years?
Well, NATO has had a significant role in various international matters over the decades, going back to the 1940s. And we've had a pretty strong alliance. But candidly, the bulk of the lifting has been by the United States of America and not Europe. Um, so perhaps I'm going to look on the bright side for a moment. Perhaps what Donald Trump will do is threatening to do with an invasion of Greenland will inspire Europe to expand its military defense capabilities so that we American taxpayers are not continually in the position of having to defend not only America's interests but also Europe's interests. So let's see how it plays out. I think it would be a very bad mistake for the United States of America to conquer Greenland, absent some kind of threat from Russia or China or some other superpower that is conquering at the same time, so that we're really coming in as liberators, as we did with Europe during World War II. I would much prefer that the President of the United States use a carrot approach with respect to Greenland. I see its significance strategically and economically. And I would love for Greenland to be a part of the United States of America. I've been there. It's a pretty interesting country, sparsely populated, but pretty interesting. I don't know if all your viewers are aware, but think of a country that's about the size of Alaska and Texas combined, with a population that is akin to the city of Madison here in the Tennessee Valley. And there are probably some other cities around the state that are in the same 50 to 60,000 population ballpark. That's how small Greenland's population is. And quite frankly, Denmark and the European community have been woefully inadequate in putting in enough defense resources to ensure that a Russia or a China, if tempted, no longer is tempted. But right now, Greenland's defenseless. And the number of NATO troops that I've seen that are being shifted to Greenland, European, I should say, because the United States is also a part of NATO. The European troops that are being shifted to Greenland are insignificant. They pale in comparison to what is actually needed to defend a landmass of that size.
So when you say you'd like to see them be part of the United States, do you mean like as a state with senators and a representative, or just as a territory?
Well, at this point, I think it would have to be as a territory. They are marginally large enough to qualify for statehood. My memory may err, but my recollection is you had to have at least 50,000 population before you could apply for statehood. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less, but that's what my recollection is. And Greenland has barely gotten past that. And I don't think it would be appropriate for a state of that small population to have the same political power in the United States Senate of a state like Texas or New York or California or even Alabama. We're in the neighborhood of what, 4 to 5 million in the state of
Yeah,
Alabama?
we're over 5 million now.
Okay, we're over 5. And that would give them, on a proportionate basis, if the math off the cuff is right, about 100 to 1 greater influence per citizen in the United States Senate than Alabama now enjoys.
Yeah,
And
they are 1% of the state of Alabama.
yeah, well, that's it. It's a 100 to 1 ratio. And I like Greenlanders. They're nice people, particularly the natives. Keep in mind, just as a sidebar, that Denmark conquered Greenland. They didn't get it peacefully. And so, if you're going to conquer territory, you better be prepared to play by the same rules, and be strong enough to prevent somebody else from conquering what you just conquered. And Denmark has not shown the desire or the capability to defend Greenland should a foreign power decide that they want to take it. And we've seen what's happened with Ukraine and Russia. Think of what kind of resistance there'd have been if Russia, instead of going after Ukraine, had decided to go after Greenland. Not
Yeah, if
much.
they send 100,000 troops in, I don't know that there's much you could do other than just bomb them.
It's, well, you're talking about 50 something thousand people. You could probably send in just a few thousand troops and conquer Greenland.
Yeah.
Right now, it's so defenseless. It
Uh,
has no military presence to speak of, other than the United States at a military facility that we have in the northwestern part of Greenland.
the Iranian people last week attempted to rise up in popular protests to topple their regime, and the regime responded with absolute deadly force. I think even the Ayatollah admits that they've killed thousands of protesters now. Is that regime going to fall, or are they just going to, every generation, kill off anybody who says anything?
Well, this has happened before in Iran under the dictatorial rule of Islamic fundamentalists. And there have been a lot of Iranians who have died in those efforts before to promote freedom and a republic and have some of the individual liberties that we enjoy and are blessed with in the United States of America. So unless you see outside forces coming to the aid of these citizens who dare to seek the kind of rights that we often take for granted in America, the regime is going to win. When you've got people with guns and people without guns, that's a pretty one-sided battle. And so my recommendation to the president of the United States and to the leaders of other countries that support democracies or who have been the target of Iranian-sponsored terrorism is to supply some of these Iranian citizens with the weaponry they need to actually be effective. If it wasn't a case of no weapons versus weapons, I think I'll call them rebellious forces. I think they have a real good shot at prevailing because a lot of people are sick and tired of the oppression that you've seen under the current Iranian regime and the economic malaise that you've seen under the current Iranian regime. But some outside force is going to have to provide those citizens with weapons. Otherwise, it's going to be a slaughter whenever the Ayatollah wants it to be a slaughter.
We've heard the president say, even go as far as mentioning putting boots on the ground. Is that something we want to get into with a country of 90 million people?
I don't. I can understand the argument that might be raised. And certainly the United States of America, if it were to have boots on the ground, would be able to topple the Iranian regime given how much opposition there is from the citizenry. But in my judgment, for a revolution to be successful, the people who want that revolution have to be the ones that actually risk their lives to make it successful. If we come in, then I can promise you that over some period of time, we would become the enemy of some significant part of the Iranian population. And then you're seeing once again, America spending American lives, our young sons and daughters, fathers and wives, brothers and sisters getting killed there. And I'm not for it. I mean, look at Afghanistan. That's probably a pretty good example of what happens when the United States of America, in an Islamic nation, um, forces a regime change and then tries to push our democratic values, liberty values on a nation that has a large number of people that just don't want them.
I hate to constantly go back to foreign policy, but that's sort of been what's dominated the last few weeks. Um, President Trump sent in the Delta Force and they seized Nicolas Maduro. Um, was that a constitutional use of force by the president? I think we can kind of agree it may have been a good idea, but was it actually constitutional the way it was done?
Well, it's constitutional until the Supreme Court says it's not. And so
Right.
we're just going to have to wait for the Supreme Court to rule. There's enough gray area that you can make as an attorney in a court of law. You can make a pretty good argument on both sides of that question. Um, Now, I don't know if there's going to be a case before the United States Supreme Court that forces a ruling on what happened in Venezuela, the efficacy of the War Powers Act, um, the amount of power that is granted to a president as commander in chief, the amount of power that is granted to Congress, being the only body that can declare war, whether warlike actions constitute a tacit declaration of war, even though it's not formal. You know, go down the list. There are a lot of unanswered questions, but past history suggests that what President Trump did will not be declared unconstitutional, just as the invasion of Grenada in the Caribbean was not declared unconstitutional. And that's what America did. We took out a socialist government and did our best to try to install a Republican form of government. And no president involved at the time or subsequently was ever found by the Supreme Court to have acted beyond the powers granted to him.
I'm kind of shifting gears here. You're talking about being a lawyer, and I know as a prosecutor, you've seen probably some police shootings. Was the ICE officer justified in shooting? I think her name was Renee Good last week in Minneapolis.
Well, that's going to be in the eye of the beholder. In my eyes, she was in the wrong. She disobeyed orders from law enforcement officers. And from the videos I've seen, I understand the ICE agent who shot her feeling that his life was endangered by her conduct, in which case it's self-defense. But having said that, in Minnesota, if this thing were to go to trial in Minneapolis, St. Paul, I have real concerns about the anarchy that is being supported in Minneapolis, St. Paul by some of their congressional leaders, by their mayors, by their governor, and by a lot of other elected officials. And that kind of anarchy support, in turn, might translate into a jury pool that is biased against the ICE officer. But from where I have sat looking at those videos, it was clearly a case of self-defense. And I'm like everybody else. I cringe at the wasted life, but law enforcement officers are put in very difficult positions, and you don't mess with them. And you certainly don't start speeding away when there's an ICE officer right in front of your car.
Getting back to the Venezuela situation, according to the Cuban government, 32 Cuban military people lost their lives trying to defend Nicolas Maduro down there in Caracas. Um, with that $1.5 billion or estimated year in oil and other economic support of Cuba, by the Venezuelan regime now apparently about to be taken away, does this Cuban regime, can it possibly stand economically given the failed economy of the Castro, regime? The Castros are dead. The economy still doesn't work down there.
Well, we have to take into account communism and the economic model that it is and how things actually play out. In a communist society, basically you have the slaves and the slave owners. And in this instance, the Communist Party members and leadership are the slave masters. And everybody else is doing whatever the slave masters dictate, which means that they're in effect slaves. And so in Cuba, the elite, which would be the Communist Party members, they're still going to have a better standard of living than most anybody else in Cuba. And the elite is still going to have the weapons while the regular citizens who are being suppressed and oppressed do not. And so I would submit that the only way you're going to have a regime change in Cuba is if somebody, perhaps the United States, perhaps somebody else, arms the disgruntled citizenry with the means that are necessary to topple a very brutal and dictatorial government. In the absence of that, the power, which is where the guns are, will continue to prevail.
If we did something like that, arming the citizenry, could you foresee Cuba becoming a U.S. territory? Because without communism, that island nation would probably be one of the wealthiest places in the world.
Well, I could see them becoming a U.S. state. I think you've got a much better argument for Cuba with its population and its size versus Greenland. But don't get me wrong, if I were to have a state coming from that neck of the woods, I would probably call it Caribbean, and any other island down there that wanted to join Caribbean as a part of the United States, I'd probably put them all together.
Nah.
So you'd have maybe Cuba, like in Alabama, we have 67 counties that
Right.
comprise a state. Well, you could have a bunch of subparts that comprise the state of Caribbean. So put in the Virgin Islands, put in Puerto Rico, put in Cuba, put in whatever island nations down there want to join us into one big basket. And that would be something to consider. I mean, there's still some pros and cons that would have to be thought through, whether we can afford it. But Cuba has a lot of natural resources. It's a beautiful part of the Caribbean. And I think it would be a nice addition to the United States. But there would be, they're suffering from the after effects of communism and the poverty. And there would undoubtedly have to be a costly rescue effort by the United States of America to help ensure that they had a capitalist economy that would raise the standard of living for all.
Last week, I think Tuesday, Governor Ivey gave her ninth State of the State address. You know, she's had Republican control the whole time. Do you think Governor Ivey has moved the state in a positive direction, or did that, longest serving female governor, really the longest governor other than George Wallace, did that fall short somehow?
Well, in my view, Governor Ivey has been a caretaker governor. She's had very little in the way of major policy initiatives that have had any effect on the future of the state of Alabama. But, and this is important, but in fairness to Governor Ivey, under Alabama law, you have an extraordinarily weak governor. So it's not just Kay Ivey. You can go back through a long line of governors. They are stripped of the kind of powers that are needed to have a significant effect on public policy. And probably the one that stands out the most is their veto power. You know, when the President of the United States vetoes something and it goes back to Congress, and you've got a closely divided Congress, as we've had for probably 90% of the years that we've existed as a nation, a veto kills something. That's political power. That's because it requires a 2/3 vote to overcome it. And it's hard to get a 2/3 vote when you've got a real debate about a public policy issue where it's close, which way to go, yes or no. In Alabama, to override a veto, you just need a majority of the membership of the House and the Senate. Well, it took a majority to pass the bill in the first place. Granted, it's a different majority. To pass it, you need a majority of those voting. To override a veto, you need a majority of the membership. So there's a little bit of difference there, but that still pales in comparison to the kind of power, say, a president of the United States has, or a lot of governors in a lot of other states have. About the only public policy leverage that a governor has, the governor has a megaphone, okay? You can go up to a podium and you'll get media coverage. The governor has control over highway projects, so you can buy votes one way or the other with your highway monies. And then the governor can appoint people to different positions, particularly when there are vacancies, but also there are a lot of boards, and that has some political influence and weight. But it's not enough to give a governor a real platform in which to accomplish significant public policy changes. So when I say she's a caretaker, most all of Alabama governors have been caretakers because under our Constitution and state statutes, our governors just don't have much power.
So I want to go back to the ICE protest for a moment. The First Amendment is one of our greatest rights, and I know we don't want to see that encroached on, but should we start handling these people more heavy-handed with the way they're attacking ICE and preventing government from carrying out their duties?
Well, I believe we ought to enforce the law. If you've got individuals who are actively interfering with the ability of law enforcement officers to enforce the law, that's a criminal offense, and people should be prosecuted accordingly. It's one thing for folks to wage protests where there might be some hollering and some screaming and the kinds of things that go with protests. It's another thing to engage in activity, non-speech activity, that impedes a law enforcement officer's ability to enforce the law. And so to me, the solution is to enforce the law against the folks who are violating the law, who have gone beyond their right to protest into criminal conduct, and allow the protesters to continue to protest as they have a right to do under the First Amendment.
Congressman, back in September, we couldn't get a budget passed, to fund the government for a year. And then we had the long government shutdown because we couldn't even agree, the Democrats filibustered and wouldn't let a clean CR pass. And then eventually, before Thanksgiving, we did pass the CR. And we did get, like 4 of the appropriation bills did pass. But now we're back up against another deadline at the end of this month. Are they going to have another shutdown? Are we going to do a 30-day CR? What's happening with that? And do we just need to blow up the filibuster in the Senate to fix this?
Well, I believe you do need to blow up the filibuster to fix it, but understand that there's also a political strategy that is involved in all of this. A lot of people may not realize it, but in the House of Representatives, by way of example, if you want to be chairman of a major committee, you have to purchase it. Literally, you have to purchase it. If you don't come up with a purchase price, you do not get the committee chairmanship. And to a lesser degree, there are a lot of committee positions that have a purchase price along with them. So we've got 4 committees that political action committees love to interrelate with because they want special perks. It might be tax law, it might be appropriations, it might be whatever, okay? And they have great interest in those committees, those 4 that we call A committees. And the purchase price when I was in Washington was $1.2 million. If you didn't come up with the $1.2 million, you were not considered for the chairmanship of that committee. And that corrupts the public policy debate, because to get that kind of money, you can't go to Joe and Jane Citizen to get it, because they ain't got it. About the only folks who have money of that magnitude are special interest political action committees. And that means that our chairmen are beholden to those special interest and political action committees. Now, that corrupts the public policy debate in a major, major way. And it also means that these congressmen and senators who want to pay back the special interest for what they have done are in a political box. Because typically what special interests want, by definition, is a special benefit to them that excludes the general public. And if you have a standalone bill of that nature, well, the public's going to get mad at you, and justifiably so, because you'll be ignoring the public interest instead of special interests that they'll be getting the largesse or the benefit or wherever it may be. And so how do the senators and congressmen pay back these special interests for the money they gave that allowed them to purchase these important committee chairmanships? Well, you come up with a scheme, a strategy that involves a huge bill that has to pass, usually during a holiday period like Thanksgiving or Christmas or New Year's, where you can put in a whole bunch of really bad things that pay back the special interests that have financed your purchasing of the committee chairmanship. And that's why we're in the mess we're in, okay? The Congress has to not pass the budgets by September 30th, or else they won't have a vehicle by which they can pay back the special interests. And these bills will be 1,000 pages long, or however you have it. And so the special interest paybacks generally aren't known about, if at all, until sometime after the votes have already been cast. So that's what this is all about. And that's why it's been now, I think, 29 years, maybe going on 30 in a row, that Congress has failed to pass its spending bills on time. That's a pretty sorry record to be 0 for 29 or 0 for 30. But that's where the United States Congress is, and it's because we've been corrupted so badly by special interests, which in turn is because you have to purchase the chairmanships of these major committees.
Talking about the spending, once you explain to me what would happen, how dangerous the debt is our biggest national security threat, how long do you think it's before we're insolvent and we can't afford to keep paying this?
There is no way to know for sure when the national bankruptcy and insolvency is going to come. In my judgment, it is now inevitable. It is politically impossible to stop. I mean, if the public were to suddenly change their political attitude and put really astute economists and tough backbone politicians into Washington in the House and the Senate, you could prevent a national insolvency and bankruptcy from happening. But to fix it, it's hard. It's like you running up a credit card bill, and all of it, you've been pushing it off. It keeps getting higher and higher and higher, and you make the interest payments on a monthly basis, and the debt gets higher and higher and higher. And suddenly the credit card company says, all right, time to pay it back. You have to make some real tough decisions. You got to cut spending in a lot of different places, unless suddenly you win the lottery or you get a huge pay raise with whatever job you have. And the trigger point is going to be this. The trigger point is going to be a sudden major event that puts our currency in a spotlight to the point where foreign companies and foreign governments decide that they are no longer going to use the dollar as what is in effect the world currency. The moment that happens, the moment the dollar's reputation starts to crumble because of this debt burden, that will be what triggers the national insolvency and bankruptcy. And in that national insolvency and bankruptcy, there will literally be hell to pay. If you follow the cascading effects of a national insolvency and bankruptcy where the federal government can't pay its bills, well, the people who are suddenly being told they have to be weaned from welfare, that there's not money for Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare, a lot of them are going to die. Hopefully families will do what families used to do, take care of their own. But a lot of families in a collapsed economy are going to have a very difficult time doing that. So in my judgment, this is not some esoteric economic thing that we're going to plow through as a country. It could be devastating. You could see literally millions of people lose their lives because they have grown accustomed to living off of taxpayer largesse. They're suddenly cut off at an economic time where there aren't jobs available. Keep in mind with the Great Depression, and this is when the central government was solvent, our unemployment rate was in the 20 to 25% range. Now, no one born after the Great Depression has been through that kind of economic nightmare. And so a lot of people have not read their history and they're not familiar with how important it is to avoid that national insolvency and bankruptcy. And to heighten the danger a little bit, we have the world's best military because we can afford it. What's going to happen when we can't afford it? What does history tell us? Well, history tells us that you tempt your political foes from other nations to take advantage of you when you're economically weak. The Great Depression had the effect of weakening our military capability that had been built up during World War II and to some degree in the 1920s. And as a consequence, with that slow erosion of our military capabilities, that caused countries like Japan to believe that they could attack the United States of America and win. That precipitated World War II, the economic mess, the 10 or 15 years previous that had weakened our defense capabilities. And that in turn also encouraged Nazi Germany and Italy to declare war on the United States of America because they believed that they could beat the United States of America because of the economic malaise that we were struggling with, that in turn had reduced our military capabilities to where what once was a fighting tiger became a paper tiger. So that this is my number one issue. It scares me the most. And the people we have in Washington, 90% of them need to be gone. There are only about 5 or 10% in there that are willing to do what it takes to prevent a national insolvency and bankruptcy. And that doesn't win any vote in the Senate or the House.
Congressman, Doug Jones, the former senator, is running for governor. I think they've got Ron Sparks, the former commissioner of agriculture, is running for his old job again. Wayne Rogers, the trial lawyer, Democrat Party chairman in Jefferson County, is running for Secretary of State. State Representative Philip Ensler is running for lieutenant governor. The Democrats, unlike the last two elections, seem to be fielding, at least on paper, a credible top of the ticket. Do you think the Alabama Republican Party is still capable of dealing with a resurgent Alabama Democrat Party, or is the situation with the Alabama Democrat Party just so bad that, getting the band back together again is really not going to accomplish a whole lot?
Well, a lot depends on what emanates from the White House over the next 10 months. If President Trump gets America involved in a significant military conflict where we're having people brought home in body bags, that's going to affect the Republican Party, and it's going to help the Democratic Party very significantly. If the economy gets out of this stagnation and starts roaring again, then that's going to help the Republicans. On the other hand, if it starts becoming recessionary then that's going to help the Democrats. So there are a lot of outside factors we just don't know the answer to that might pop up over the next 10 months. I will say if I was a Democrat right now, I would be focusing on legislation pushed by Wes Allen, who's running for lieutenant governor, a fellow by the name of Marks down in the Wiregrass, who's running for the United States Congress. And there's a senator who's involved in it too. I think it's Chastain, but I'm not sure. I have to
Johnny Chastain out of Dothan.
that I refresh my recollection. But they're pushing a bill to make naturalized citizens second-class citizens, to bar them from running for the vast majority of public offices in the state of Alabama. That is bad in so many different ways. It's bad, first and foremost, because these people are our equals. They have done it the right way and they've become American citizens. It's wrong in a political sense because you're now alienating 20-something million registered voters in the United States of America and 50-something thousand registered voters in the state of Alabama who are naturalized citizens by declaring that it's the policy of the Republican Party and those particular elected officials to discriminate against naturalized citizens. And then it's all for naught because the United States Constitution, if such a law were to pass the legislature, it would be declared unconstitutional like that because it violates the Constitution in many respects, foremost being the Equal Protection Clause. But nonetheless, those three individuals have filed a bill to declare all these naturalized citizens, second-class citizens, barred from running for most of our public offices in the state of Alabama. And if you keep doing dumb things like that, that could come back to bite you in a major way.
Is that kind of bigotry not also an insult just to voters? Because if I want to vote for a Hispanic or an Asian person, I should have that right to vote, whether they were born here or not.
Well, absolutely. The way to resolve these kinds of belief system disputes is at the ballot box. You don't resolve them by saying we're going to bar our political opposition from running for public office. That's the kind of stuff they do in dictatorships or communist nations, where they suppress or bar opposition from participating in the governance process. I mean, it's horribly wrong. I'm just astonished at Marks, Chastain, and Wes Allen, who's running for lieutenant governor, our current Secretary of State, that they think this is a good idea. It's Jim Crow all over again.
Congressman, this is more of a localized issue, but we've got Space Command coming into Redstone.
Well, we hope.
We think we're going to get Space Command here in the near future. Eli Lilly has announced plans to make a major, project up in that same, Madison County area. We've got, Mazda Toyota Manufacturing and Polaris and, Blue Origin. There's like a lot going on in that greater Huntsville area. Do we have the infrastructure in place for that area of the state to keep growing, or do we have some major issues we need to confront there?
We have major infrastructure issues in the Morgan County, Limestone County, Madison County areas. Okay. That's the general commute to get to work. You might could include Marshall County or Jackson County. We do have some from each of those counties. And we do not in particular have the road infrastructure. I don't know if very many people are familiar with Memorial Parkway in Huntsville. I grew up here. I've been here for over 6 decades. And I remember a time as a kid when I could get on the parkway on my bicycle and I could travel about a mile from Hazelton Square Shopping Center to my house and never have a car pass me in broad daylight. Okay. If you tried something like that, you'd have a very short life expectancy today. And in the neighborhood I live in, it's a residential neighborhood. Things are so congested that some of our residential streets are turning into thoroughfares. These are tiny 2-lane streets, with people parking their cars in front of their houses, with kids running around. And it's because the city of Huntsville has done such a poor job of not just maintaining the roads we have, but creating new road systems that help promote the standard of living of the people who are already here. And I shouldn't pick just on the city of Huntsville, because you've also got the county commissions, you've got the mayors and councils of other cities. But I don't want us to become a gridlock like Chicago or Atlanta or Washington, D.C. During rush hour. But we're very quickly getting there. We've got another road, just by way of example, called 4 Mile Post, not too far from where I live. Well, traffic will be backed up at a traffic light for a half mile to a mile every single workday. And it's a 2-lane road for a good chunk of it. Some part of it has 2 lanes plus a turn lane in the middle, but it's not designed to handle that kind of traffic. And we're still expanding explosively. That means there's going to be more cars, and we're way, way, way behind. So something's got to be done by the city government. I've got a lot of ideas on how to address it, and it would address it. But unfortunately, that has not been the priority of our local governments. And I add the S on there, plural, governments, because there are a lot of local governments that are now being impacted in their jurisdictions by the lack of adequate transportation.
Hey, Congress, I want to go back to this thing with Al and them again. With them trying to pass this kind of bill, especially if he becomes lieutenant governors, is this not going to hurt us with companies investing and moving jobs here to Alabama? Because why are you going to come to a state that's doing that to our citizens?
Well, that's another bad consequence of a bad law. There are a lot of cascading effects, okay? I mentioned some of them, but the one that you just mentioned, might it have an economic adverse effect? Absolutely. Some naturalized citizens have done very well creating their own businesses or managing businesses. And I wouldn't want to move here to the state of Alabama if I were them, if I knew that I was going to be reduced to a second-class status pursuant to Jim Crow-like laws. That kind of racial discrimination, that should be way, way behind us. We should have, we struggled in the 1960s to put it behind us, and we're still struggling to the current date. But this bill to discriminate against 50,000 citizens in Alabama and over 20 million citizens across the country, that's just evil.
Congressman, we've held you here for over 50 minutes. Is there something you'd like to add before we're done?
No, if you're happy with the questions that you've asked, I'm happy with the way things have gone.
We can go 3 hours with us asking questions, but we got to think about the guest at some point.
We can do 3 hours, but it needs to be spread over a commensurate number of weeks.
So, Congressman, so you got another you know what the grandchild's going to be? A boy or girl?
It's a boy.
That's a boy. And that number 15?
Yeah, so the girls will outnumber the boys. I'm doing the math real quick. Only 10 to 5.
10 to 5. Okay, well.
So the boys are happy to have company.
And what ages do they range from again? I guess now from an infant to.
Well, we have one that's a year old, and then we'll have a baby in May or June. And then the oldest is 18, anxious to go to college. So she's a senior at Madison Academy, and she just can't wait to get to a university. And I can understand that. I was the same way when I was a senior in high school.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Congressman, and congratulations on the new grandchild.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a blessed day.
Yes, sir. You too.
Thanks for being on.
Stop.